Okay, I'll use the mic.
If I just may repeat his question, maybe for those who didn't hear, there are countries that are not covered: Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, I think, and others. So his question is, when are you going to cover them, or what are the reasons for leaving them out? Okay, so Mark.
Okay, how's this, Monty? Can you hear? Thanks. So I have a question for Klaus and one for Agnes. For Klaus, one of your slides was on countries that had done well and countries that had done badly. And does the report look at the reasons behind that? On the list of countries that have done well, I saw Brazil, which has had a zero hunger program for the last few years. That might be one reason why they've done well. I saw Kuwait on that list. So if you invest your oil revenues in a very generous welfare state, maybe that helps. Is there an assessment of the reasons behind good or bad performance? And then for Agnes, on the gender equality index, what is used to measure the political inequality? Because I mean, you mentioned it has some deficiencies, but what's it made up of?
Very good, thank you. Let me take the gentleman behind you, and I'll come to you.
I'm Alan Jury with the World Food Program. I guess the question that I have, it's a question and a comment. I think one of the data, and Agnes, as you were pretty clear on this data, that in terms of the negative correlations, it's education and health. And yet so much of the thrust of the current food security initiative is to focus on the economic role of women as smallholders. I think we need, the evidence would suggest, and as Cheryl said it, her evidence suggests that EFAD, you get better benefit by including the social sectors. We need to use this research to be a renewed voice for, if your goal is hunger reduction, social sector investments still remain a very, very big thing. I mean, at the very time that we're showing the social sector investments seem to have the biggest single impact, we have a global food security agenda that's moving towards saying productivity and farming and economic is the biggest single impact. And I'm not saying both don't have impact, but frankly, in terms of the data, it suggests health, nutrition, and education will get you a bigger impact on women's factor on hunger, than investment in certain types of agricultural productivity.
All right, I would like to go to our panelists. I'm not sure a lot of people agree with that last conclusion, but it can be debated. All right, Klaus, Agnes, and Cheryl.
Yeah. The question from Mark was, what can you learn from the successful ones and what could you avoid from the unsuccessful ones? The list indicates pretty clearly on those who are unsuccessful is avoid wars and conflicts, which sounds trivial, but that's the easy way out. For the successful part, I think it becomes more difficult, and it's actually something which we have in mind for the next year, because also Welthungerhilfe said, what can we tell countries what was done correctly? Now, it sounds easy, but if you don't want to end up with motherhood and pie statements, I think it has most probably to be regionalized and made more specific. But there's a high interest in boxes. Why suddenly is Ghana so successful, and why are they doing it right? And so, yeah, it's coming.
Klaus, could you answer the questions about the countries that are not covered?
No, that was Agnes,
that was the Global Hunger Index in general, why those countries were not covered in the report.
Okay. Yeah, where there's no data, you cannot cover. It's as simple as that. I mean, it's given the medium reliability of even the other data, if you go into those countries, I think it's a shame, and those countries would need, in many instances, much more like targeted post-emergency, post-crisis, or even crisis intervention. I think it's...
So it's not because if researchers are scared to go into those areas?
No,
okay, thank you. Agnes?
I actually want to answer Alan's and Mark's question at the same time, because this has to do with the basic data on which the gender gap index is based. As I mentioned earlier, it's an imperfect measure, and it is extremely imperfect in particularly these two areas of economics and political empowerment. So the economic participation and opportunity sub-index is composed of 5 things, which includes differences in labor force participation rates, ratio of estimated female to male earned income, female to male wage ratio for equal work, ratio of women to men among legislators, senior officials, and managers, and ratio of women to men among technical and professional workers. There's nothing about asset inequalities in agriculture. There's nothing about property rights to own land. And so I would say that as an indicator of how well the agricultural sector is doing in terms of gender inequality, zip. It doesn't tell you anything. Similarly, in the area of political empowerment, there are 2 sub-indicators. One is the ratio of women to men in minister level and parliamentary positions, and the terms of years that a woman has held executive office in the last 50 years. Now, that does not tell you anything about voice and participation on the ground. So I would, I think the reason why you have one reason why you might have a really weak correlation with the gender gap index is that the index in these 2 areas in particular is very weak. And so some people have argued, so why use the gender gap index at all? You have to start from somewhere. And I think that, as long as we are realistic about what the indices can tell us and what the data tell us, we have to start somewhere to build the evidence base, and we hopefully improve the evidence base as we go along. Now, in an ideal world, I would love to have more gender disaggregated data on, for example, whether men and women can own land, how much men and women have control over land. We're starting a new research program on gender and assets. We hope to contribute to that evidence base, but it's certainly not going to be available for this wide range of countries. And so turning this now to your question, so does this mean are we going to abandon agricultural sector and food security investments to focus on social sectors? I would say most definitely not. Bad data should not be an excuse for not doing something that's good. But I think it highlights the fact that you have to have social sector and productive sector investments going hand in hand. Very interestingly, it's not always recognized that one reason that you have low productivity in agriculture is that your workers are too skinny and underfed themselves, especially female workers who may be suffering from micronutrient malnutrition. Farmers who are not educated may be less able to adopt new technologies. There are many studies which show, for example, that an additional element of knowledge regarding legal rights. So Klaus Deininger and colleagues in Uganda did a study looking at people's knowledge of the new land law. And they found that the higher people scored in terms of the knowledge of the land law, the higher their probability of adopting better soil management techniques and fertility conservation techniques. So you see these very strong interlinkages between education and health and farm productivity, and I think that, following what Cheryl said, a multi-sectoral approach is really what we need. We need to be able to exploit the synergies between those 2 sectors. So it's a challenging task, definitely.
Very good. Cheryl?
I wouldn't add too much more, just to say that I think, it probably, looking forward, has less to do with shifting funding one way or the other. I mean, a lot of us would say that the current attention is something of a correction to a situation in which there was not enough money going in, and while there was quite a lot going into the health and education sectors, there's never enough, we know that. But I think it's an even greater challenge, and that is, how do we take the resources that are already there and create interventions that correspond better to the fact that people don't live their lives in sectors, they just live their lives. And I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
Excellent, thank you. Let me just add a couple of comments here. There was a question as to why some countries were doing better and others worse. If you look at, the map is not there. Would I get it up if I did that? No. You have the map in your report. You look at worst performing countries in Africa, DRC, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Chad, and Sierra Leone, they all have been mired in wars for the last 5 to 10 years or longer. So I think peace and stability is very, very important. Political governance, I'm sure Regina will appreciate my saying that, but I think all those factors underlying peace and stability are very, very important, as much as the other issue that we have chosen to highlight this time. I also would like to add a comment on the productivity and social sectors. I think it's not an either-or, and actually it might be even dangerous to look at them as an either-or. There are two things. The levels of resources are different. We know that the Food Security Initiative is talking about $20 billion. At the same time, it's talking about $63 billion for health. So there are a lot more resources on the social side. But even with that, there are not enough resources to go around. So the question is, how do you bring the synergies, just like Agnes said? In particular, if you don't have enough money to invest in productivity, because at the end of the day, healthy people, well-fed people want to have a job. They want to earn an income. So it has a lot to do with growth and productivity. So the smart approach would be to see how resources going to education and health don't just build those skills and those resources, but also can support the productivity agenda so that healthy people can find a job, well-fed people can find a job. And in most rural areas, most economies in Africa, it's going to be in the rural areas. So agriculture productivity should be seen as a complement to investment in health and education and not a competitor. So I'll open this side of the audience, and then we'll go back to you. So where's the mic? We have a person here, right? Did you want to say something, ma'am? Oh, okay, I thought. Should I go back to the other side? If the other side of the aisle is, okay, in the back there.
Yeah. My name is Bello Kello. I'm from ICRW, but I'm also a Kenyan, so it was refreshing to get some information from Kenya. My question is actually to you. One, does IFPRI currently have a strategy that focuses these loans that you give to sub-Saharan African countries to target women? Because my impression of what I see in Kenya is first, that the loans are given to the government and the government, has to use the money, but probably close to 50% of that money is probably never used in the first place. And two, I see most of that investment in the wrong things like vehicles and stuff like that. And therefore, probably women who are supposed to be the producers of food never get to access it. I agree with you about the other social services that have been given, but in terms of direct investments in agriculture, I've not seen much focusing on women. So I don't know whether you have, you've formulated some clear strategies that will help some of these countries to focus those investments in agriculture. And two, I would like to just ask is, with respect to these correlations that are generating quite some discussions, do you have any trends? Because it seems that it's just a snapshot, and from a snapshot, it's very difficult to make really policy statements that you can work on. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I'll go over here and I'll come to you, Suresh.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Marcy from PATH. I guess a little bit building on the last gentleman's comment. Going through the back of my mind this whole time has been, correlation doesn't prove cause. And it's a really interesting examination of the gender gap index with the hunger index, but I think especially when we're looking at particular correlations with education or health or economics, particular sectors, it's important to keep that in mind, that those things are linked together, and just because there's a high correlation with education doesn't mean that's what's causing or the hunger problem, or that we're going to invest in education alone and that's going to fix something. So I was curious to hear about your thoughts on the actual causal relationships.
Thank you. Suresh?
Babu from IFPRI. Agnes, I was just talking to you before this presentations. The land rights particularly came up as a serious issue in East Africa when we promoted this document last month, and the media was asking questions primarily what has been done in terms of improving rights of ownership of land for women. So if you can highlight on that, I know progress has been made, but what is happening at the grassroots level? Are the women are able to get the land, have a title so that they can invest in productivity assets in land? And if you can expand on that, that will be useful. The second issue is you said that gap between men and women is more important than the level itself. Our level is also important, but where would you invest now if women are the farmers and we are thinking about building their capacity as farmers, as professional farmers, for example? Already the bias is towards men, bring them in and build vocational training and so on. But how do we bring women as professional farmers and entrepreneurs in the agriculture sector so that they can play their role in value chains and markets? Can you expand on that?
Very good. Any more questions? Yes, there are a couple more in the back, and I'll come to you now.
My name is Gabriel Liza. I work for the UNFAO. I happen to be one of those African men, and I am just concerned that we sometimes forget the other side of the equation, which is educating men to respect what women want, that gap in between, to close that gap. Is there anything being done about that side of the equation?
Very good.
Just two questions. One point of information in terms of the evaluation in the few countries, were they large-scale projects or national programs? The second question, just to build on that, I was trying to understand the gender gap. And let's take education. What was the indicator? Is it enrollment or what? But in terms of country planning, what does enrollment really mean? I'm based in Tanzania right now, and every evaluation we've done, it's like, yes, we've been chasing the MDG target, and all the children have been involved. The quality of education is way down there. So you have a whole bunch of kids coming out at age 11, 13. They cannot be absorbed at the same rate in secondary schools. It's also where the value of the intersectoral planning comes into effect, because why can you not keep girls in schools at that pace? The water sector has not kept pace. And that's particularly important for girls. The critical question really becomes, what skills, vocational training can we have in place that will make sure that these children are absorbed into the labor market?
Right.
And to do with then household bargaining power. So it's really, the danger and the concern is that we really are pushing on education, but at what cost, and what is that education? And perhaps really look in the totality of it.
Very good. So let's start with Cheryl. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for those questions. Just a quick description of IFAD. The majority of the resources that we disperse are in the form of loans, sovereign loans to national governments. Over the next few years, we hope to be exploring other modalities that would allow us to be more responsive to the full range of different country types and so on. But for now, really the majority of the loans are just as you described, to countries. Now, having said that, we've also always taken the approach of that these are the country's projects and they are the implementers. So the process of the loan itself is also part of trying to strengthen national institutions and capacity of the governments themselves to plan and administer and evaluate these programs. Our effort has been one of going in and working with the government to assess and design the projects, and to do that in a participatory fashion. How successful we've been in that approach in any given country will vary, certainly from country to country, but that is the approach that we seek. Within that, we've spent a lot of time both looking at the very specific ways of mainstreaming gender into our project cycle and evaluation. And again, we think we've made progress there, and we have some results that we can point to for that. But again, it's always a work in progress. It has a lot to do. And I can tell you in our own particular case, I think it's been very sobering to us just in the last year. We've had a change of leadership, and our new president brings with him a much, much stronger commitment to this issue than the previous president. And it's having its effect right down through the institution. And so that's always a concern. And I would say taking that issue and applying it at the grassroots level, we see the same issue where even if we take a participatory approach, if women at the local level, if we don't have women leaders at the local level who can help create greater opportunities for women farmers to participate in the dialogue, the discussion, and the project design and implementation, then we'll probably have fewer women participating. So that is one of the areas that we're focusing on, trying to create greater leadership among women farmers at the local level, because when we look at farm organizations, too often they're dominated by men, and women don't have equitable participation even in those critically important organizations. I think I'll stop there.
Agnes, in the class, do you want to say something about correlation, trends, and then we get back to land rights and education?
You and me, or
either or.
Agnes?
Fine. I would be thank you for that point about correlation, not establishing causality. I'm an econometrician, and I know that. But so I must say that the reason that we do these correlations is that you cannot really do anything else with these data as they are. The data that I personally use to support investments in closing the gender gap come from micro evidence from households and from people who are individually measured with health. I'm a micro person. But the thing is, those data are not available on such a wide range of countries. And so you cannot use them to make this kind of global arguments. But what I will do, though, is point out some of IFPRI's past research, which has been based on microdata, which has been nationally representative. So, for example, my colleague Lisa Smith and Lawrence Haddad have done some very interesting work using DHS data sets where they look at 40 developing countries, and what they find is that countries in which women's status is very low are also countries where you have very high rates of child malnutrition. And these indicators of women's status have to do with inequality of education, inequality of decision-making power in the household, lack of access to economic earning opportunities, and also differences in health status at the community level. What they also found out using data on child malnutrition over a 20-year period is that 50% of the reduction in child malnutrition was actually due to changes in women's and men's education, closing the gender gap in education, and closing the gap in men's and women's status. So there is a lot of micro evidence which is based on sound econometric studies, which are not correlation-based. So I think the correlation-based analysis is useful in pointing out patterns, but you should not rely on them to give you any estimates of magnitudes of impact. They will help you identify, oh, this is an area I need to look at. Let me focus on this more strongly. In the area of land rights, there has actually been a lot of reform in land law and family law in Sub-Saharan Africa over the past decade. And I think that given that a lot of African land tenure systems are customary tenure systems, it's probably rash to go straight into a titling regime, because sometimes land titling will just end up alienating women and customary and people who have had access to land through customary means. What has been done, however, has been registration, and some of this registration, like in Ethiopia, has been done in very low-cost means and very transparent means, where they have certificates with pictures of the man and woman, and which is very helpful in low literacy societies. I think strengthening customary rights is very important. Having transparent means for local adjudication of those rights, as well as legal literacy campaigns. I think there are a lot of NGOs, legal literacy NGOs now in Africa, which are going around teaching people that, you do have these rights, because if you don't know those rights, then you will not claim them. The question about how to bring women into the agricultural sector, a lot of it, I think, has to do with whether our policies and interventions at the ground really make that provision to provide access. For example, in an irrigation scheme, is membership only given to the person who has his name on the title? Usually it's the man. Why not allow two members of the household to be members of the irrigation group, for example? I really like the point about educating men to respect what women want. I think this is why I think that the solution to closing the gender gap is a solution that involves men. I think it's impossible to have gender equality if we don't take what men need and what they need to learn also into account. Finally, the point about what does enrollment tell you? It doesn't really tell you much. So what it does tell you, so what's the point of bringing all these kids into school if you don't know what they're going to learn? They just sit around twiddling their thumbs, you know. So I think that, again, this is an area where the indicators don't necessarily tell you a lot, but this means that you need to have more national, country-based, locally based studies to really look at what the content is of the curriculum and what the issues regarding quality of schooling and what type of skills people who are in school learn to equip them for life, basically.
Very good. Klaus?
Yeah, coming back, I'm not a statistician, and I also know that correlation doesn't prove cause. At least in our statistic lessons was always that the reduction of the number of stalks in the ulcers was not the reason why there were less birth in that area. But what I would like to stress for a moment is the tremendous opportunities we have working together with NGOs on these subjects as long as they are explained plausible. So if you don't deduct like causality, but you can say plausibly this and that is understandable, can take place. I think it helps then tremendous to push the cause in government and policymaker circles, because if I see a huge disadvantage of, in the past at least, of the CGIAR was that it had never fully, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, is that it never fully succeeded, or never succeeded even in parts, to make people aware of what basically their contribution is. And it was statistically there, it was methodologically there, but to get a policymaker excited, to get people getting goose pimples of what's going on there, that has never taken place. And I think with that instrument here, we have something at hand or in hand where we can do. There are other possibilities, I know, but this is one.
Very good. Thank you. Let me just add a comment to IFPRI and what it does. There are very few organizations that work on the grassroots level as much as IFPRI does. I think that the fact that they sign agreements with the national governments is not necessarily an automatic link to the money being spent by government. Those agreements can stipulate how the money is going to be spent, where it's going to be spent, and by whom. So I think that the governments are the only legal entity to sign with an international global organization. That's why it happens, really. And also the issue on the vehicles, if you didn't have the vehicles, the people would be sitting in the capital city, and they would say, they're useless. They're just sitting in Nairobi. They're not living. So if you want them to live and go to the countryside, they have to have means of transports. If you had, rails and river boats and other things, perhaps then we could say that. But they need the means to work, and I think IFPRI is really doing a great job working with vulnerable people on the ground. So I will open up for another 2 questions because I have just only 5 minutes to go. Finally. All right. There you go.
Thank you. My name is Pamela Rao, and I'm a medical anthropologist. I've done some research in child survival in South India. And I know that culturally, or historically, I should say, there's been an issue at the household level in certain parts of the Indian culture to discriminate against girls in terms of nutrition. And I was just wondering, I don't know if you have the data on that, but if you have any comments or observations about whether or not that continues to be the case. Thank you.
Very good. Any other question, or we'll call this one? There is one there, and that's the one with the last.
This is a question and a comment and an observation. The role of women policymakers, it seems to me like something we should really look into. A comment is an attribution to Cheryl Morden, who I think has done really, I would like to say, more than any woman to bring the gender issues to the attention of the United Nations through her role in IFAD, and I would like to applaud that. And thirdly, you know, going on Capitol Hill and talking to women congressmen has been extremely revealing this year. And we were challenged to go back at my organization, ACDI VOCA, immediately to do a brochure on women in conflict and what we have done to help them. I was recently in Africa with Lena Kalima, the first ever assistant minister of cooperatives who is a woman. She took us into her community, and she leads the...
Which country?
Kenya.
Kenya.
A fairly small group of women legislators in Kenya. She's made an enormous contribution. She was a key woman in bringing peace to her area, where two warring tribes had been warring for forever. They've had peace now for 7 years. She took us to a girls' school that she herself is touting and took us there, and we had a corporate contribution to a water tank, which will now enable the girls not to have to go to the river for their water. For me, this whole thing has just been mind-boggling, but I have really noticed the more women we can get into policy-making roles, the more things really start to happen.
Thank you. Agnes and Cheryl, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Also for your earlier comments. Yeah, on the question, thank you, Sue, for your kind remarks, a little over the top. Women leaders, let me just tell you, I was in Rome last week and left town before the summit started. But on Sunday, there was a meeting of a nascent network that's gelling little by little of women leaders, women ministers and leaders in agriculture. And every time we've just created the space and the opportunity for women at these events to come together, they really have such an appetite and an energy for doing this. So I think continuing to follow, I meant to actually mention that in my remarks to say, I think that's a ready-made audience that we should get this information to right away. And just for interest to people here, perhaps, the real driver at that meeting last Sunday was the new U.S. ambassador to the Rome-based agencies, Ambassador Cousin, who is a dynamo and is completely dedicated on these issues. So she's another ally I think we should be cultivating over the next while.
Very good. Agnes, do you want to add a word or two?
Just very briefly, yes, unfortunately, there is still discrimination against girls in South Asia.
All right. Not all right to what you said, but all right to the seminar. Thank you very much for coming. Klaus just told me he will reveal the 2 next topics for the Global Hunger Index at the next policy seminar. So thank you and look forward to seeing you.